The Moors and the Christians. Written by S. Thomas Thompson. Narrated by Amanda Harkett. Produced by Audiobook UK. Chapter 1. One of the biggest festivals of the year in Javea was the Moors and the Christians, where people would dress up as ancient warriors and enact the battles that had been seen in the area centuries before. Angelica took Tommy to see these shows whenever she could, seeing it as both part and parcel of living in the area, plus immersing herself in the culture. Over the years of living in the town, she had come to see Javea as her long-term home, and that meant it was Tommy's long-term home, and that meant he had to learn as much about the place as possible. The men in masks on horseback played like they were locked in deadly combat with each other, crashing swords, lances and shields as though their lives depended on it. Tommy sat with his mouth agog for the entire show. The realism was far too much for a small child to distinguish play from the real thing.
"Mummy, is this going to end up with a lot of blood?"
he asked, not taking his eyes off the action. "I hope not," she answered with a glint in her eye. Tommy couldn't see the glint, but read the intonation in her voice. He was reassured that he wasn't about to see one man kill another. The lances looked like they were likely to cause the most damage, the actors slipping away from their blows at the last second. Angelica marvelled at their agility and wondered how much training they had to go through in order to make such a spectacular but safe show. Tommy spotted their elderly neighbour Mariana walking past with a bag of sweets, and that was about the only thing capable of dragging him away from the action.
"Mummy, it's Mariana!"
he exclaimed. She let go of his hand and watched Tommy walk over through a group of 5 people to Mariana. His back was turned to the action, confirming to Angelica that he really was ready for some sweeties. A few seconds later, Angelica thanked her lucky stars that Mariana had distracted Tommy from the action. One of the riders crashed into the other, his lance puncturing the armour. A spray of blood arched through the air, and he crashed to the ground with a sickening thud. It was clear that he was dead long before the ambulance arrived. Chapter 2. Javea Jones was at home when he received the phone call for him to attend the Moors and Christians festivities. He had been sat in front of his television, watching a game show that was neither flashy nor clever. He felt like his life could be described in the same way at times. Javea's mother used to tell him that he should always tidy up before he left home, in case he was run over and killed while he was out, and people thought that he always lived that way. She had lived by that mantra herself. Javea didn't live the same life. His living room was just that, a room that looked like it was lived in. Empty takeaway cartons on the table between the sofa and the TV, the socks he had taken off just thrown on the floor, and more empty glasses than his dishwasher could take in one go. He was happy with his living room looking like it was in constant use. The rest of his flat was just the way his mother would like it. Neat, tidy, clean and looking like it had never been used. Javea grabbed a handful of glasses and returned them to the dishwasher, returning once for as much rubbish as he could manage to fill up the bin. It made the place look 100 times better, but it still wouldn't pass the mum test. Javea grabbed his socks, sniffed them to make sure they were passable, put them on, then his walking boots, and left the flat en route to where the Moors and Christians display should have been. By the time he arrived, it was no longer there. The streets had been cleared. The people had gone home. The police had barricaded the place. It looked more like a war zone than a place for families to spend a fun few hours. Chapter 3. Angelica looked around for Tommy. In the commotion, people ran left and right, looking for both family members and a way out. People tripped up, bodies briefly piled up on top of them before people grabbed others and got them out of there. Luckily, Mariana had seen the commotion just as it started and had managed to get Tommy to the relative safety of the side of the street in a shop doorway. Angelica could see him clearly and see her protecting him by pointing out something interesting in the shop window. There was a lot going on, but Angelica's kindly neighbour helped keep him from experiencing too much of it. She handled the situation in exactly the same way Angelica would have. And that was why the two neighbours, more than 40 years apart in age, got on so well. "Tommy, Mariana, let's go home, shall we?" Angelica said like it was just the natural time to go. Mariana nodded approval. Tommy muttered something about the action figure he wanted from the shop window, and they slipped away from the crowds, which were thinning out by that time. The walk home was busy. There were tears in the darkness from a few people who were walking the same route. Angelica told Tommy that it was the excitement of the men on horses. He accepted that and moved on with his evening, wondering if the fish he usually spectated in the daytime would be there at night. It was too dark to go and inspect, but he had a feeling that they would be there just the same. He decided that the next time he went out in the dark to the Arenal, he would take a torch with him, or ask his mother for a torch. He knew what a torch was, but he didn't know if they owned one. Maybe the next time he saw Javea Jones, he would ask for a torch. He was sure that Javea was the type of adult that would have one. Before they left the Arenal, the police had asked the two women for a statement. Angelica and Mariana made theirs as short as possible. Just a few words about the fact that they saw nothing, Mariana, or very little, Angelica, and that they could be contacted the next day for something more detailed if needed. There were a handful of police keeping an eye on proceedings, but not enough to take comprehensive statements from everyone who was there. Taking contact details seemed like the best way to gather as much data as possible with limited resources and time. Getting back to their apartment block, Angelica opened her front door and asked Tommy to go and clean his teeth and wash his hands and face. When he disappeared around the corner, she thanked Mariana for her quick thinking and calmness. "Tommy will never know, but I will thank you for the rest of my life for protecting my child from the images of this evening." Mariana nodded a kindly nod and disappeared into her own bedtime routine. No words were needed. They both knew that they would look out for each other, and that both would look out for Tommy. Angelica locked her front door and made her way to the bathroom to make sure Tommy was doing as he was told. When she walked into the bathroom, he was sat on the loo. He opened his mouth wide to show his gleaming teeth, demonstrating that he had indeed cleaned them. She peered inside, paying particular attention to the back ones. These were the ones he missed if he missed any at all. But on that night, he hadn't missed a single tooth. All that was needed was a hand and face wash when he got back down off the loo. And all of that was done in a matter of 2 minutes.
"Night-night, Mummy,"
he said wearily. The fresh air and the late night for a child had taken its toll on him. Angelica sat beside him to watch him go off to sleep. If he was full of energy, then she would just leave him to it. Her presence could send his imagination and mouth into overdrive. When he was so clearly going to drop off in a matter of seconds, she took the opportunity to watch her only child drift off into a peaceful place. "Night-night, Tommy." And then he was far away in the land of dreams. She envied his ability to get off to sleep. She knew it wasn't going to be that easy for her that night. Angelica had 2 thoughts bouncing around inside her head as she poured the scalding hot water from the kettle onto her decaf tea bag. Her brain wasn't going to let her go to sleep, but there was no way she was going to stimulate it with the caffeine at that time at night. The first thought in her head was one of Tommy's safety. She had read that Javea was a safe place to bring up a child. The statistics showed that there was a low crime rate and that people felt safe there. But she had been close to multiple murders in her time in the town. She wasn't bothered about herself. She was someone who courted danger if she could, but her son didn't deserve this. Her role in life was to protect Tommy and deliver him as a fully grown adult, ready to face up to the rigours of the world. Angelica felt that she was doing a great job of this so far, but she needed to keep a gap between her own interest in the dangerous people of Javea and her son. The second thought in her head was related to the accident at the Moors and Christians pageant. Something didn't feel right with the man who ended up killing the other. He didn't fit. The rest of the people in the display seemed like they were excellent horse riders and handled their weapons with skill and dexterity. But this guy felt like he was a last-minute stand-in. His horse riding skills were basic, and his handling of his weapon left something to be desired. It was effective, that was for sure. But that was also why Angelica worried. He wasn't supposed to be effective, just look effective. Even so, it wasn't these facts that really made her stop and think about whether this might have been an accident. She kept telling herself that it was her overactive imagination and her attraction to danger. Angelica compelled herself to stop seeing murder at every turn, but the guy's uniform was the final straw. It didn't look quite like the rest of the uniforms. Close enough to the untrained eye. But Angelica was a photographer by trade. It was her job to spot the tiniest details and bring them to the fore or eliminate them altogether. And the details on this guy's costume were just not right. She eventually dropped off to sleep, but her dreams were of a seamstress, making the uniforms for the Moors and Christians pageant. She couldn't shake the doubts, even in her slumber. Chapter 4. Javea arrived at the scene, leaving his car around half a mile away because of the sheer volume of foot traffic going into the opposite direction. The last thing he wanted or needed was another accident, this time one that he was responsible for. From the look of panic and the heightened body language of the people walking towards him, Javea was sure that something unpleasant had happened, and it was his job to find out just what that unpleasant thing was. It took him a further 10 minutes after leaving his car to arrive at the scene of the accident. Even though it had been officially classified as an accident at that point in time, it was a standard procedure for a murder detective to be called out when one person had killed another, no matter how seemingly innocent. It might just be that he signed it off as an accident and left. It might be that he thought foul play was a possibility. But the fact that he was called and given the chance to make a decision was the right thing to do. And Javea appreciated spending his time doing this far more than watching a trashy game show. "What do we have so far?" Javea asked one of the local police, who he knew was of Welsh ancestry, just like him. Javea's father was Welsh. Bronwyn's mother was Welsh. Whereas Javea had given a Spanish forename and a Welsh surname, Bronwyn Garcia had been given the opposite. "We've spoken to as many people as we could. It looked like one of the actors has just got his timing wrong and his lance has crashed into the chest of one of the other actors playing the role of a Moor. The guy who played the Christian said that he had been hit in the chest too. He left in another ambulance. It turned up pretty much as soon as the first one had left. I called for the first ambulance, but not the second. I guess a member of the public called for another," Bronwyn explained, glad for the chance to converse in English. It didn't happen very often in her job role, certainly not with colleagues. "And do we have names?" Javea asked. "No, the guy who was hit was in no fit state to be giving us his name. He died right here," Bronwyn stated, pointing at a patch on the ground that was splattered with blood. The blood of the poor man who had been smashed in the chest with a lance. "And the other guy?" "Nah, he just left. I'll ask the organisers for his name when I manage to get hold of them." Javea could see that things were being taken care of at the scene. He had come across Bronwyn before. She was methodical and thorough. The streets were closed off, barricades were being erected, and the last of the public were having their details taken. Javea could also see that people were not just being taken for their word. They were showing ID, having it checked, and then being sent on their way. Definitely a scene where Bronwyn was in charge. His mind wandered to somewhere else. He could continue his investigations there. Chapter 5. Angelica looked at the clock. Her sleep had been broken. She was now wide awake. It was close to midnight, and the events of the evening were still replaying in her head. She was tempted to call her brother Augustin, the murder detective from the northeast of England. That wasn't fair on him. He had a family too, and he liked to be in bed well before midnight if he could help it. She shuffled her feet, hoping that the movement would make her tired. It didn't. She wanted more of the action. That was the reason Angelica couldn't get to sleep. She knew that somewhere out there, Javea Jones would be sent out to investigate the death of the actor in a Moor costume. The Moors and Christians festivals were a big thing in Spain, particularly in the Valencian region. The Moors were the Muslim invaders that entered and conquered parts of eastern Spain during the period known as the Reconquista, from the 8th century through to the 15th century. There were mock battles, the Moors arriving from the sea and fighting with the local Christians. They were family festivals, bringing people from all parts of the globe to witness the reenactments that were both spectacular and interesting. Angelica wanted real thrills, not those mocked for tourists and families, and she felt like she had just witnessed another chance to get involved in the investigation of a death, a suspicious death in her eyes. Angelica checked her activity tracker and found that she had only managed an hour of sleep that night. The movement of her feet did nothing to bring sleep any closer. She had a decision to make, either keep on trying or give up and get up. Angelica wasn't sure which one would win out in the end. Chapter 6. Javea took the drive over the mountain to Denia, which was where the men involved in the accident had been taken. La Padera Hospital was larger and better equipped for an incident such as this than the smaller medical facilities in Javea. Javea loved the drive over the top and back down the other side. He has run up it, cycled up it during competitions and charity events, and he enjoyed doing these activities. But driving was preferable. It used up far fewer calories and allowed him the time to relax and enjoy the views. Even at that time of night, there was a shadow of the mountain and the lights of Denia on the way down the opposite side of the mountain. Javea knew which cars coming towards him were locals and which were driven by tourists. The locals knew the bends like the back of their hands, swerving in and out as they wound their way from bottom to top and then back down to the bottom again on the other side. Tourists were far more circumspect, taking their time, slowing almost to a halt when a vehicle passed the other way. He saw more locals and fewer tourists on his journey over the top, but the time of night meant that he didn't encounter many cars at all. He counted 10 on the way up, stopped counting at 5 on the way back down as his mind went from enjoying the drive to getting back into work mode. He had questions to ask, people to speak to, and a death to investigate. It might not turn out to be murder, but his job was to gather evidence and make that decision. As he arrived at the car park, Javea checked out the parking restrictions. It was one of the rare places in Spain where people paid attention to the instructions for parking a car. Vehicles were clamped, fines were steep, and he wasn't willing to pay a fine. The car parked safely, Javea entered the hospital and approached the receptionist. Asking for the men who had been brought in from the accident at the Moors and Christians Festival in Javea, he was told to wait, and a doctor would be out to speak to him in a few moments. Those few moments turned into 5 minutes, but Javea didn't mind. He was catching up on the football scores on his phone and knew that the doctor was there to serve patients before people like him. Wrexham, the biggest football team near to his father's hometown, had won and were closing in on promotion to the Football League. They were a team that nobody outside of the UK had heard of until they were bought by the Hollywood royalty duo of Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney. That thrust them into international recognition. All Javea wanted was a good team doing well. "Detective?" the voice asked, taking his attention away from the cold and wet North Wales football scene and back to the Spanish warmth and his investigations. "Sí? ¿Cómo puedo ayudar?" Javea listened to the man's voice. It wasn't local. In fact, it wasn't Spanish at all. Looking at his name badge and seeing the name James Smith confirmed Javea's assumption. "I'm looking for the guys who came in from the accident." The relief was obvious on the face of the doctor. He struggled with his Castilian, as the Spanish language was known. It was good enough to do his job, more than good enough, but he could never get past the speaking part. He heard a question in Castilian, translated it into English, decided on his answer in English, then translated that into Castilian, and then spoke. It made conversation slow and punctuated with his thoughts. Over time he had got quicker at doing this, but he still wasn't what he could call native. One of them was pronounced dead at the scene. We checked him out when he got here and confirmed that. There's nothing that could have been done for him. A massive blow to the chest stopped his heart in an instant. "Do you have details?" "Not at this moment. He arrived in full Moor's costume, authentic too. That meant no wallet, no ID, no phone. We're waiting for the organisers to get in touch and for a next of kin to identify the body. Until then, he's on ice." "And the other guy?" "Been and gone." "That was quick. Was he okay?" "Well, that's the thing. There wasn't a mark on him. He was confused, looked like he wasn't quite with it, but nothing medical. I tried to check him over and he left." "Was there anything else that I might need to know about him?" Javea asked. It sounded like he needed to know some more, but he had no idea of what more might be. The doctor sighed and rolled his eyes. Javea initially saw this as a sign that he was wasting the doctor's time. But after a few seconds, it was clear that that wasn't the case. He was searching back through his memories. He spoke with his eyes still closed and his head back. "We were told that he needed some attention. He wandered in on his own. When I went to check with the paramedics that had brought him here, the ambulance was leaving and there was only one paramedic in the ambulance. They always work in pairs. Always. Not this time." Chapter 7. Javea arrived back at home with half an investigation carried out. He wasn't able to gather enough from the scene or the hospital to make sense of what had gone on. His findings were that a man was killed and another involved in the accident was hurt, but when he got to the hospital, he wasn't hurt, and now he wasn't there. Aside from that, there were the statements and contact details of probably hundreds of people in the area who were in attendance. Granted, many of these would have seen nothing, but some might have seen something crucial to his investigation. All of that was for the morning, but that morning felt like a long time away. When he couldn't sleep, Javea usually put on a movie that he'd seen 100 times before. It tricked his brain into thinking he was doing something while the familiarity of the movie let him slip away into sleep, not needing to stay focused to see what was happening next. He had a whole shelf on his DVD cabinet that contained his go-to movies for occasions such as this. It included Fight Club, Snatch, a few James Bond films, and the Jason Bourne series of movies among others. He reached for Tomorrow Never Dies, a James Bond movie that followed the formula. It was never hailed as a classic, but in Javea's eyes it was the classic of its time, typically 90s, typically Pierce Brosnan. The credits started. Javea popped to the kitchen and grabbed a drink, and then he settled back down as the obligatory opening sequence played out. He went back to the kitchen for a bag of crisps while the overlong, overplayed credits played out, getting back to his seat after a toilet stop just in time for the movie to start in earnest. Javea settled into the cushions on the sofa, feeling like he was sinking into them. This was a good sign. When the sofa felt like it was eating him alive, Javi knew that his body was growing weary and heavy, but it was the only good sign present. His body might have felt heavy, but his mind was still racing. He hadn't taken in any dialogue from the movie. He hadn't looked at the action scenes. He wasn't keeping up with the storyline. Instead, his mind was on two places, the hospital and the site of the death. He replayed what he'd seen and heard over and over again, and none of it made sense. Knowing that he wouldn't be asleep for some time, Javi picked up his phone. His first instinct was to text Angelica, but he fought that. She was a woman with a young child who had to be at school the following day. There was no way she would be up. Was there? His resistance didn't last long. One text. Send it, then wait for 5 minutes. If she didn't answer, then she would be asleep, and he would have to find some other way of entertaining himself while his brain chewed over the findings of the day. Hi, Angelica. Are you awake? As soon as he hit the send button, Javi chastised himself. Well, whenever she read the text, she would be awake, so the question was futile and childish. Never mind. He'd have to shake off the embarrassment for the next time he saw her. That was Javi's way with anyone. If there was an opportunity to put his foot in his mouth, then he would inevitably take it. He set the countdown timer on his phone for 5 minutes and waited for the inevitable. The alarm would go to indicate his 5 minutes were up. Then he would think about his stupid text more than he thought about the death of an actor in the Moors and Christians festival. With only 30 seconds left, Javi decided to put himself out of his misery. He looked at the wall in front of him and thought about having a conversation with the mirror hanging from it. He rose to his feet, checked his reflection, and opened his mouth. Ping! Before he could say anything, his phone notification told him there was something to draw his attention to. Javi looked and saw that Angelica had replied. They started a text conversation. I am now, lol. Sorry, did I wake you? No, only joking, I was awake. Are you okay? Yes, saw the man killed today at the festival. Nasty stuff. And Tommy? No, he was with Mariana. Good. Not a sight for young eyes. Nor old ones. Did you see anything? Do you ever switch off? Not really. Don't know how to. What was the last good thing you watched on TV? Money Heist. Very good. And do you recommend I watch it? Yes, but in English. Your Spanish isn't good enough. See? You can switch off. Lol. I suppose. You? What do you watch? With a young boy, I mostly watch cartoons, but when I get control over the TV, I like to watch period dramas. Downton Abbey. Never seen it. Maybe we can watch it together. Maybe. The conversation ebbed and flowed like this for 10 minutes, each waiting for the other's reply, spying the flashing dots on the screen, wondering what the next response would be. The smiles they both developed during their text conversation stayed with them as they cleaned their teeth, got undressed, and went to bed. Their friendship was growing. It made Angelica happy that she had a friend in this town that she was a stranger in. Javi was happy that he had someone to talk to. Life was lonely when you were a cop. Chapter 8. The next morning, Angelica got up wearily to take Tommy to school. He still wasn't old enough to get himself up and ready, and she was kind of clinging on to the years where he needed her time and attention. She feared the teenage years when he wouldn't even stick his head around the living room door to greet her on his way back from being out with his friends. The school run was typically Javea. Cars were left at every possible place, and some impossible ones too. Parking wasn't a structured or organised thing in Spain. You stopped where you wanted to be, and everyone else had to make their way around you. People weren't being disrespectful, it was just the way it happened there. Angelica parked a few streets away and walked the last part of the journey to school. It was a good habit to be in at any rate. Angelica got some fresh air, Tommy too. Plus, It was much better on the stress levels to stay away from the roads immediately surrounding the school. When Tommy was safely inside, Angelica muttered to herself, "My job here is done." She always felt like that. Her role in the school day was to get him there on time and see him safely over the threshold of the school gates. The next bit was down to Tommy and the teachers. Angelica looked left and saw a woman looking over at her. Angelica had spoken to herself too loudly and had been overheard. She wasn't embarrassed by her words, but they were meant for just her and nobody else. "Morning," the other mum said to Angelica.
"Busy, isn't it?"
Angelica had seen the woman at the gates a few times, but they had never spoken. "Always. I'm not sure they would have had it any other way, the Spanish. They seem to love a hustle and bustle, even in the middle of nowhere," Angelica responded. She always blurted out multiple thoughts when she first met someone. The nerves were so strong. It embarrassed her. It also broke the ice. "Tell me about it," the other mum replied. Her English accent was strong. Southern, but not from a part of the UK Angelica could pinpoint. Any accent from the south of Midlands was pretty much indistinguishable from any other as far as Angelica could tell.
"Talking of crowds, did you see the Moors and Christians festival last night?"
the woman asked Angelica. "A bit. It got cut short, though," Angelica responded as though she was breaking bad news to someone.
"I know. I was backstage. I was the one who designed and made the costumes for everyone. It took months, but it was worth all the effort to see him look $1 million out there. It was such a shame that accident happened. I suppose that's what happens when you mix crowds, weapons and animals."
"It wasn't nice to witness, I can tell you that. You designed and made the costumes. They looked fabulous."
"Yes, that's what I do for a living. I thought that making the costumes for the festival would be a good advert for my work."
"They looked great. You're very talented."
"Thank you so much."
"Can I ask a question?" Angelica said. "Of course. Sounds intriguing." "Were all the costumes the same?"
"There was one set of costumes for the Moors and one set for the Christians, but all the Moors were the same and all the Christians were the same."
"I thought so," Angelica mused. She was already far away from the school. Her thought processes were going into overdrive. She just had about enough wherewithal to thank the woman and say goodbye. But that was it. Angelica's brain was trying to match information that didn't compute. Chapter 9. The reports were piled up on his desk. The police officers who managed the scene at the festival the night before had done a good job of speaking to as many people as possible. But that was the end of their job. They took names, telephone numbers, and a short statement. Then they placed them on Javi's desk and walked away. And now it was his job to sift through the pieces of paper to build a credible timeline of the events of the evening before. This wasn't going to be exciting. He started at the top of the pile, believing that there was no other way to do this than methodically. He looked at each report and placed it in one of 3 piles. The first pile was the people who hadn't seen anything and had just given the police their details in case they could be of any help later down the line. These wouldn't be discarded, but they weren't going to uncover anything of interest at that point in time. Javi would get his assistant Kiki to send them all a text informing them that the police might be in touch over the coming weeks. If they remembered anything else significant to get in touch right away, Kiki could then contact them all at her leisure. The second pile would be people that he would contact himself over the coming days. He thought that this pile wouldn't be any more than 10 to 20 people at most. They might have something to help him. They might not. Their experience at the festival couldn't be left to chance. He had to speak to them, and he had to speak to them while the memories were fairly fresh in their minds. And the third pile was a group of people he needed to speak to right away. Their statements indicated they had seen the fatal blow or moments leading up to it. These people would help him piece everything together quickly, and the speed of the investigation was paramount. Javi had already been told by his immediate superior that he needed to file a report by the end of the day. Paperwork was the least of Javi's worries, but getting this right was at the top of his list. He got more than halfway through the pieces of paper. The must speak to now pile had one name and number. He tried to call, got voicemail, and left them a message to call them urgently on his mobile. The no rush at all pile was growing steadily. The middle pile had 2 pieces of paper in. Javea decided that his progress, painfully slow as it was, had earned him a walk. He got up from his desk, put a paperweight on each of the piles, and left the room in a rush. He hated being cooped up in his office. He hated the sight of the walls in front of him. He hated his desk. His chair wasn't comfortable enough to sit in for long periods of time, and his back ached. Full of moans, he stepped into the outside world, where everything would feel better. It did. Chapter 10. I could do better than that, Angelica spoke out loud as she looked at the poor attempt to clear up the blood from the accident the night before. The fact that the scene had been removed of its cordons and police tape indicated that the forensic investigations had concluded. In her mind, the blood should have been cleared up properly. She bet that a man had made this half-hearted attempt at cleaning it up correctly. Angelica walked up and down, closing her eyes on occasion as she tried to retrace her steps accurately from the night before. Whenever she stopped, Angelica pictured what was happening, what she saw, and where Tommy was. These helped her piece together her version of the death. She walked the same steps 4 times, each time recalling more details than she had the time before. It helped her get her head around what was going on. She didn't like the feeling it gave her. Something wasn't quite right. Angelica closed her eyes at the spot where she saw the man hit and killed. She slowed the video down inside her head, going through it frame by frame. The pieces didn't fit. This wasn't the jigsaw that was shown on the outside of the box. Angelica opened her eyes again, shielding them from the sun, which had crept its way out from behind the buildings and was now directly in her eye line. When she regained her vision, Angelica became aware of a man appearing around the corner. He looked forlorn, like he'd been sent out on an errand he didn't want to do. His entire concentration was on the ground 2 feet in front of him. Angelica watched as he nearly bumped into 2 people who were walking in the opposite direction. One on her phone, the other reading a newspaper as he walked. The man approaching Angelica looked up for a second, saw her stood at the spot where the man was killed the night before and froze. 5 seconds later, after surveying the scene in front of him, he turned on his heels and was away. Angelica sensed his nervousness and decided to follow. Chapter 11. Javea walked for 20 minutes. It would have been longer, but the cup of coffee he stopped for before he started walking meant that he was out of the office for 45 minutes in total. That was long enough when he had work to do. Sitting back at his desk, Kiki came in with another coffee. He smiled at her. She set it down on his desk and left him to it. She knew when to leave him alone, and this was one of those times. When he needed her, he would let her know. Javea picked up the unprocessed pile from under the paperweight, a gift from his mother when he first joined the police. She said that he would need a paperweight as he would be dealing in paper. And then, with every subsequent promotion, she bought him another. More responsibility, more papers, more paperweights. It had a replica of Valencia Cathedral embedded in the middle of the glass. Javea hadn't been to the cathedral for many years. He thought a trip there was in order. After his work was done in this case, he would take some time off. He'd earned it. The first piece of paper in the pile was another for Kiki to text. The second contained a name he knew well. Angelica Boyle. Chapter 12. Angelica tried to manage the 2 tasks of following a man whilst making notes about him on her phone. She didn't want to make voice notes in case she drew attention to herself from the man who she was tracking. So she typed. She was a quick typist usually. That was when she wasn't walking and watching someone else at the same time. Angelica spent as much time deleting and retyping as she did making the notes in the first place. Something about this man told her that that was all worthwhile. He walked away from the sea, heading uphill with the same method of staring just in front of himself as he travelled. It nearly brought him bump to bump with 2 other people. The man didn't bother stopping, changing his way of moving around or apologising. Angelica thought it strange. That wasn't the only strange thing about him. The weather was taking a turn towards summer, the sun beating down a heat that would only get stronger as the day went on. The man was wearing clothes that wouldn't look out of place in the UK at that time of year. They were the right clothes for showers and a cold breeze, neither of which he could encounter on a warm day in Javea. He weaved in and out of the streets, turning left at one and right at the next to end up back on the same street he had just left. Angelica felt this was a sure sign that he knew she was following him. She sped up near to the junctions so she could see him at all times, and then dropped back as soon as she had turned the corner so she could stay as far back as not to be seen. The man deviated from one side of the street to the next. His erratic walking caused Angelica to get closer. Her notes were now of the direction of travel. She had to make a point of looking for street names wherever she could find them, adding them to what was now becoming a substantial note. She could edit it when she got back home. Better to have too much information than not enough at all, Ange. Angelica decided that the man's erratic walking was good reason to get much closer. She was small enough and light enough on her feet that she could get near to him by upping her stride and not make a sound. Her rubber-soled shoes helped her move quickly. The shoes were light, Skechers, she seemed to remember. They were designed to get around without feeling like you were actually wearing anything at all on your feet. The gap narrowed. The man continued his focus on an imaginary spot just in front of him. She reckoned if she was bigger and stronger that she could catch him up and take him to the ground before he even knew she was there. But that wasn't going to happen. Angelica stood at around 5'2". The man was at least 6 foot tall and probably weighed twice as much as she did. It wasn't very often that Angelica wished she was bigger than she was, but this was one of those occasions. Getting closer still, Angelica felt a trickle of tension sparkle through her body, starting at her neck and pulsing out from there. She smiled at the adrenaline rush, thanking her body for it. Angelica wanted this rush. That's what she got out of bed for. Well, that and raising her amazing son. Her phone vibrated. She tried to cut the call off before it sounded. Too late. The phone rang. The man turned around, immediately recognised Angelica from the scene of the death, and ran off. She was powerless to stop him. Chapter 13. Wherever you go, someone ends up dead, Javea said with a mix of joking and seriousness in his voice. Angelica took mock offence. That's a fine thing to say to a friend. I can go off people, you know. You know what I mean. Your passion for danger is strong, stronger than you are. I just want to make sure you're okay. There's not a great deal I can do about it if I go to a family event and someone is killed right in front of me, is there? I know. Are you okay? Javea asked, ramping down the joking and replacing it with genuine concern for someone who had become as close to a good friend as he had managed in quite some time. He wasn't one for letting people in. He guessed that Angelica wasn't one for that either. Yes, I'm fine. I've just got a few questions. Something doesn't feel right about the accident. I'm glad you said that. I have my doubts here, but they're just doubts at the moment. Fancy meeting up for a coffee to discuss your concerns and mine? Javea loved a coffee. Angelica loved a cup of hot milk with some coffee dropped in the bottom. Anything stronger and she'd be climbing the walls for hours after. Yes, just let me know the place. I can be at the port in 15 minutes. The Arenal in half an hour max, Angelica replied. looking around at where she'd ended up after following the guy. She was between the port and the old town. She had walked uphill for about 3/4 of a mile and could now see the Mediterranean below her. The sea looked still, another sign that it was going to be a hot day. "The beach house. We can still catch breakfast there if you haven't eaten. If you have, the coffee there is good. The seats looking out to the sea are the best spot in town to grab a morning coffee." "Deal. I know where it is. I'll be there in 15 minutes. "Great. See you soon," Javea replied, looking at the pieces of paper on his desk. He would be through them and out to see Angelica as soon as he could. She wouldn't mind him being a few minutes late. Chapter 14. On the edge of town, a man returned to his bedroom after his morning shower. He had taken longer than usual that day. He always felt that he needed to wash off the exertions of the previous day first thing in the morning. This time he had so much more to wash off. The day before had been particularly taxing, but he had completed something that had been on his mind for decades. He dried himself off partially, walking out onto the balcony of his apartment to let the sun do the rest of the drying. He loved the fact that from his balcony he could see and not be seen. His entire view was countryside. People paid a premium to have a view of the sea, but not him. All he wanted was privacy. This gave him it. The drying complete, he looked over at the charcoal barbecue in the corner of the balcony. He opened the lid, saw that there was enough charcoal already on there. He went to the kitchen, grabbed some firelighters and a box of matches. The smoke from the barbecue filled his face, making him cough and wonder why he hadn't done this before the shower. As the barbecue did its thing, turning orange flames into white hot coals, he went back into his bedroom. Opening the wardrobe, he ran his hand along the clothes, loving the way they felt against his freshly washed hands. He bought clothes this way, from the feel of them rather than the way they looked, and some of the clothes he bought weren't anything at all to do with how they looked or felt. They were purely functional, part of his plan. He took 2 outfits from his wardrobe and laid them on the bed. The first was a paramedic's outfit that he bought online. It was supposed to be a cosplay outfit, but actually looked close enough to the real deal. And that was the point. The man had bought 2 before online and rejected both, sending them back for a refund. But when this one arrived, he was taken by its authenticity, worth the extra €20. The second outfit was a Christian style, almost the same as the actors had worn in the Moors and Christians festival the night before. He had made this himself, basing it on the outfits worn in the dress rehearsals in the days and weeks before the actual festival. It wasn't perfect, but close enough to get him into the backstage area and on a horse. The man took the 2 outfits onto the balcony and put them on the barbecue. They couldn't be used against him now. Chapter 15. The 2 friends sat awkwardly with each other. There hadn't been much uneasiness when they first met, but the waitress had seen both of them in there separately before a few times, and had kind of struck up conversations with each in the past. As they arrived, bumping into each other on the promenade around 30 feet from the entrance, the waitress said, "I didn't know you guys were a couple." Embarrassed cries of "We're not" from Javea were accompanied by a redness on both of their faces, and that was enough to kill the conversation dead as they sat at a table on the balcony overlooking the sea. Both had their body pointed away from the other, looking out to the Med, watching the swimmers and paddleboarders go about their business of slowly making their way out from the pebble beach to the deeper waters, and then moving at a much faster rate on their daily exercise. Angelica envied their bravery. Even at this time of year, she imagined the sea to be cold enough to give you goosebumps. Javea had tried open water swimming. He preferred cycling or running as his form of exercise. He would do it again, but he was in no rush to participate. The sun danced off the seas, reflecting back into the eyes of the 2. At pretty much the same time, they removed their sunglasses from the top of their heads onto the bridge of their nose. This near-synchronized action broke much of the tension. They laughed. "So, how's your day been?" Javea inquired, starting where he should have 10 minutes earlier. The only voice around their table had been the waitress who Javea asked to come back in a few minutes. "It's been a strange one, and I thought yesterday was going to be the strangest day of my week, having seen a man die right in front of my eyes. I guess we all have weeks where we don't expect. I can't offer anything else except for that pearl of wisdom, I'm afraid. All I can say is that I'm here if you need to talk." "Thank you, Javea, I know, but sometimes you can't just talk something out." "A problem shared?" "Yeah. So how about you? How's your day been?" "Paperwork. Least favourite part of what I do. But it did give me a couple of people to speak to. And you," Javea explained. He had made 3 calls from the stack of papers on his desk. 2 went to voicemail. The other was Angelica. He had his phone on full volume in case one of the others called him back. He couldn't miss that call. "Well, sounds like some progress being made. Not sure I can say the same." "Tell me more." "There was something off at the festival. The guy who knocked the other one off the horse wasn't wearing the same uniform as everyone else around him. I thought maybe he was from a different regiment or whatever they call them, but I happened to bump into the woman who made all the costumes this morning at school. She confirmed that all the costumes were the same. Then when I was back at the same place this morning, a man walked towards me. Then he walked away quickly from me. I followed. You called. He ran away. Again, nothing concrete. He didn't look or feel right, though. I don't have anything that you can use in court, but I can tell you this isn't as simple as it looks." Javea mulled over what Angelica had said. He loved listening to her at any rate. Her voice sang as she spoke, the intonation flowing like she said everything as though it was a poem. Even when she was giving him information to decipher, as in this case, he listened to the voice before the words. "That fills in some of the blanks I have. I went to the hospital to speak to the man who wore the wrong uniform. He wasn't there. No injuries. No reason to go to the hospital. Does that fit with your experience?" "I can't see why he wouldn't need any medical attention except for if he was in shock. There was no contact between him and anything that would have caused him harm. It shook me up. It might have shaken him up even more." "No, he was supposedly taken there for injuries to his chest." "Doesn't sound right to me," Angelica offered. They finished their coffees, talking about less fraught topics than the death of a man the night before. But all the while, Javea wanted to finish up and get back to the hospital. He had more questions to ask. Chapter 16. Angelica decided to go for a long walk. Her car was at the port, her child was between the port and home at school, but her mind was all over the place. The good weather and beautiful scenery were 2 of the main reasons that she came out to Javea. She wanted to use the temperature there and the fact that it rarely rained to get moving and get fit. The 3rd main reason she came to a foreign country to restart her life was her ex-partner and Tommy's dad, Patty. She was warned about Patty by everyone she knew. "He's no good. He's incredibly jealous. Why doesn't he engage his brain before opening his mouth? What do you see in him?" But she didn't listen. She was young, headstrong, and felt that he would change, settle down when they started a family. He didn't. In fact, Patty got even worse when they had a child. All of the jealousy he displayed towards other people such as friends, family, and work colleagues, when there was just the 2 of them, turned into jealousy of Tommy. Patty was jealous of the time that mother and child inevitably spent together. He couldn't keep his hands to himself, hitting her and threatening their son. On many occasions, she had to choose between a beating herself or one for Tommy. She chose herself to end up black and blue every time. What mother wouldn't? And now she suspected him of sending malicious texts to her over the previous year or so, even though he was locked up in prison. Augustine, her brother, knew about the texts. They were sent from a burner phone, no way of tracing it, and they weren't difficult to get hold of either inside or outside the prison walls. She couldn't rule out one way or another that Patty was involved. As long as he was behind bars, she felt some degree of safety, though. With a slight breeze in her face and the sun beating down on her neck, Angelica set off on her walk. She wasn't sure whether she needed to do it at any pace, seeing as she was going to walk for a long distance and in the heat. Whatever people did to get fit, tone up, or feel in shape, Angelica always had the impression that it was about hard work, sweating and feeling the burn, whatever that was. But walking was different, surely. She decided that she would walk at a good pace, but not too fast, and take over an hour to meander to places she hadn't seen before in the town. The area that was closest to the sea was flat, but it very quickly got steeper the more you walked away from the front. She decided that the flat was best for her first fitness walk, and set off. A good walk never did anyone any harm, she thought to herself as she dodged in and out of cyclists and pedestrians. The pavement was multi-use, and you had to have your wits about you. Angelica enjoyed the sun, the feeling that she was making a difference, and the sweat forming in her armpits. She could get used to this. Chapter 17. The same route to the hospital looked very different in the daytime. Javea hadn't been satisfied with the answers he received the first time, but he couldn't quite put his finger on why, and he didn't know what to do about it. But speaking with Angelica had given him a bit more to go on. The man wasn't wearing the same uniform as the rest of the actors, according to Angelica. He needed to verify this fact with a second person. It wasn't that he didn't trust Angelica's memory. It was that, in police work, you needed as many corroborating facts as possible. The doctor might be able to add more details, give him hope, open another door. Going down the mountain, he could now see all of the properties that emitted the lights the night before. Dinia was famous for its restaurants, the ferry to Ibiza, and its castle, a nice place to spend some time. For Javea, he wasn't going there for the food, the ferry, or the castle. He was going there for the hospital, the doctor, and the information that would help him piece this case together. Was it an accident? Was it murder? Time would tell. The drive from the bottom of the mountain was punctuated by pedestrian crossings, traffic lights, and roundabouts. It took Javea far longer than he anticipated to get to the hospital. It always took far longer than anticipated to get anywhere in Denia. That was par for the course. Once there, he headed to the same part of the hospital where he had spoken to the doctor the day before. Javea loitered, waiting to see if the man passed by. He would rather grab a quick chat in passing than make an appointment and draw him from his work. It was only a few minutes until he saw the same doctor walk past. "Excuse me, can I ask you a few more questions?" Javea asked. The doctor looked surprised at first, but then put on his glasses and recognised Javea. "Yes, detective, how can I help? Didn't you ask all you needed to ask last night?" "Well, there wasn't much to go on last night. I've had the benefit of looking through information and speaking to people since then. Plus, I've had some sleep. That always gets the brain working." "Lucky you. I'm on a full shift. I haven't been home since last night. We're short-staffed and overworked. You can have a couple of minutes, nothing more." "Thank you. I assume there's been no sign of the man coming back for medical attention?" "None." "And you said that you saw the ambulance arrive?" "Yes." "And was there anything about the ambulance that caused you to question the whole thing?" "The whole thing?" "You said you didn't have much time. I'm cutting to the chase. None of this feels right to me. How about you?" "Now that you mention it, the ambulance looked like the older style ones we used to have. I didn't question it at the time. I just thought we might have had a shortage and used an old one, but maybe not." "Maybe not indeed." Chapter 18. Javea's phone rang as he walked back to his car from the hospital. Looking, he saw it was Kiki. Always a good sign. She only ever rang him when it was essential, and seeing as she was doing some chasing up that morning, essential calls meant progress. Kiki. Javi, I have spoken to the organiser of the festival. We have a name. The man who was killed is Hugo Cruz. He's lived in Javea for a while at least. He's been in the past 5 Moors and Christians displays, according to the organiser. I'd love to give you more, but our system is down. That system has been a pain since the day we had it installed. I blame Madrid. Why? I blame Madrid for most things, but it's the government that's imposed an untested system on us. Politicians want to rush it through with the elections coming up. They want to tell the voters about all the positive change they have made to policing in the country. They're not bothered about those of us who have to work with their follies. What is a folly? Kiki asked. Her English was excellent, but there was still the odd word that she hadn't come across before. It's like a white elephant. A what? Never mind. It's something that looks good but doesn't necessarily work or do anything. I get it. Do you have anything else for me, Kiki? What about the other man? The organiser doesn't know who he was. They have a rough plan of what will happen, but he doesn't have a level of detail that shows who should be at which point at which time. They show people once and expect them to pick it up and run with it. Right. Anything else? One more thing. The address of Hugo's sister. She lives in the town too. Do you have a pen and paper? No, but I will do in about 15 seconds when I get to the car. Got it now. Go ahead. She lives at Calbrosellas. The first block on the left as you drive there from the police station. Apartment number B5. Her name is Maya. I've been given all of these details by the organiser of the festival. He doesn't have her number, but has picked Hugo up from there in the past few weeks, so it looks like it'll be the right address. Good luck. Thanks, Kiki. Javi got into the car, left the door open to allow some fresh air to pervade and cool the inner temperature. The car was far too hot to sit in comfortably. Javi was far too cost-conscious to use the aircon at this time of year. They were a couple of months off the high summer. He would save his aircon usage for then. He sat off for Calbrosellas, a street that ran parallel to the front of the Arenal. He knew it well. Being close to the main road and away from the beach and amenities, it was one of the cheapest streets to live in Javea. He used to live near there himself. He used to go to school near there too. Chapter 19. Angelica finished her walk in plenty of time to get over and pick Tommy up from school. She took that time to grab a drink from the car. There was something about warm water that appealed to her. She had seen all of the articles on the internet related to the power of cold, but to her, warm was the way to go. Not that she could find anyone to agree with her. Even Tommy would turn it down and wait for a cold drink when he got home. She waited in the car until it was the right time to get out and get her son. Too early, and she stood there like a tin of milk, as her mam used to say. Too late, and Tommy would worry that she wasn't going to be there at all. Like Goldilocks, Angelica wanted to get it just right. As the clock ticked over to 3:10, Angelica left the car and walked along the shady side of the street. She'd had enough sun for the day by that point. Her sun hat had had more use that day than the rest of the year to that point put together. She was worried about sunstroke, sunburn, and all the other issues connected to being out in the sun for long hours, such as dehydration. She swigged the final part of her water and dropped the empty bottle in the bin on the corner before the school. Angelica's walk had helped her put a few things in place. The man who had been involved in the accident and survived wasn't supposed to be there, she was sure of that. His costume didn't look right. And he left the scene in an ambulance, apparently, but he wasn't injured. Angelica had witnessed that. She felt that tracking down this man was the key to solving this mystery, but she had nothing to go on. Tommy appeared at the school gate. The teacher spotted Angelica and let him go. That was the procedure. You needed to have someone specific to pick you up in order to be allowed out. Safety first. "Mummy!" Tommy shouted in delight. But there was something else in his voice. Angelica detected an anxiety that Tommy sometimes had. "Good day," she started.
"Yeah.
"What did you learn about today?"
We've been talking about the Moors and Christians over the last few weeks. We finished today because it finished last night, the teacher said."
"Well, that's exciting. How did you finish it?"
"It really was a finishing day, Mummy. We have made a newspaper together, and that needed the last bit sticking in. And then I had some colouring to do for my picture. That took me all the way to lunchtime. Then this afternoon we had a story, and then the teacher asked some questions."
"That sounds amazing," Angelica responded, looking for the same level of enthusiasm in her son. It wasn't there. Tommy was flat. Tommy muttered. "Did you like doing the Moors and Christians as a topic?" she asked.
"When we started it, I liked it, but now I don't want to hear about it ever again. I'm not going next year, or the year after, or the year after that. I'm not going ever again."
"That's fine. If you don't want to go, then you don't have to. But you might feel differently about it in a year's time."
"I won't,"
Tommy responded, folding his arms. That was Angelica's way of ending a conversation. Tommy had learnt it from her. Angelica and Tommy drove back home in silence. He wanted to get his school clothes off and start afresh. Angelica was in deep thought. She knew that the events of the night before must have affected him, even though he didn't witness anything directly. She had major doubts about it being an accident. She vowed to clean up the mess for the sake of her son. Chapter 20. Javea rang the bell at the front of the apartment building. It was an old design that had been renovated over the past few years to bring it up to modern specifications. There wasn't enough space to add a lift, but the nature of buildings in Javea was that they weren't so high that this was a problem. But the rest of the place had been brought to standard, and it was far more than just a lick of paint. The internet connection was the envy of the rest of the neighbourhood. The entrance had been given a complete makeover to look like a fancy office reception, and the communal swimming pool had been completely replaced. He tried to remember what it looked like before, but that was one of the issues with Javea's memory. He couldn't recall things from the past that well. People, places. If a bridge was knocked down, Javea had difficulty remembering the bridge ever having existed. He had no idea why that was, but figured it was something to do with the brain and survival. He put most things down to that. If his ancestors hadn't survived, then he wouldn't be here. He buzzed again. Patience wasn't strong with him that day. He felt like he was being given the runaround by everyone. The doctor wasn't totally with it. The man involved in the accident had gone missing, and nobody had returned his calls about the night before. Something had to give. Javea looked over the street to the school where he had spent some of his childhood. Moving backwards and forwards from North Wales to East Spain had meant that he never found anywhere to call home. But this school and this neighbourhood was as close as it came. He squinted, trying to picture himself in the playground, enjoying the sun, kicking a football around and chasing his friends. It came back to him all too easily. Javea would gladly start again and go back there. It wasn't that he was dissatisfied with his life, but having a 40-year reset sounded like a great idea. Even better if he could keep his experience in the meantime. "Hello?" The voice interrupted Javea's trip down memory lane. "Good afternoon. Is that Maya? My name is Javea Jones. I'm with Javea Police. Can we talk? It's about your brother." "Javea Jones? There can't be more than one person with that name in this town. I remember you from school. Come on up," she replied, pressing the button at her end that opened the reception for Javea. He would have to buzz again at her door, he suspected. His suspicions were wrong. The door was left ajar. He could hear a kettle boiling. Did everyone expect the British detective to want a cup of tea? He hoped not. The Spanish influence in his life from his mother meant that he was far more partial to coffee than tea. Good quality coffee, at least. "Maya?" Javea asked as he pushed the door and stuck his head around it. His feet were firmly planted on the outside of the threshold to the property until he got permission to enter. It felt better that way. "Come in. Tea?" she replied. "Coffee, if you have it," he responded loud and clear. He didn't want to chance a cup of tea. The tea bags they sold in Spanish supermarkets weren't what the British would call tea. Lipton's had cornered the market in the rest of the world as far as Jave's travels informed him. But you wouldn't get away with that in the UK. His favourite when visiting his father's family in Wales was Yorkshire tea. But even the own-brand supermarket teas were good enough. He wondered why these teas hadn't travelled to Europe or the Caribbean, where he avoided tea at all costs. "Of course, come through to the kitchen. Let's see what little Javea Jones has grown up into," Maya requested. As Javea walked in, she looked at the 3-foot mark as though little Javea Jones wouldn't have grown in the decades since they were last in each other's company, as though she hadn't also aged. Her eyes rose until her neck was craned up instead of down. "Hola, Maya." "Hola, Javea," she replied, trying to force a smile onto her face. The loss of her brother hadn't hit her as hard as it might someone else, but it was still a sad time. "How are you?" Javea asked, realising that in that instant that was a stupid question. Before he could try to retract or apologise, she smiled and held out her hand to indicate it was fine. "I'm okay." "My, how you've grown. That's what tends to happen when you go from a schoolboy to a man." "Has it been that long?" "I can't think when or where we would have met up in between. You?" "Suppose not. So, you're in the police?" "For many a year now. I'm a murder detective. I'm looking into the death of Hugo. I remember you from school, but don't ever remember you having a brother." "Well, we don't remember everything that happened in the past," she replied. The caginess was evident. Javea locked onto it. He didn't know how to deal with it. "No, we don't. But I thought I'd remember that. Was he older, younger?" "Older, and he lived away when we were young. Probably why you don't remember him." "Maya, I'm going to ask some questions related to Hugo's life. I need you to think and answer. I don't know if some of these might be upsetting, but believe me that I wouldn't ask if I didn't need to. Is this okay?" "Yes. Do you think he might have been murdered?" "I don't know, but my job is to investigate and find out." "Okay." "Do you know if Hugo had any enemies in life, anyone that would want to see him come to harm, or even dead?" "Oh my God, no. 1,000 times no." The words were emphatic, but the body language wasn't. Something told Javea that he wasn't getting the full picture from Maya. Something reminded him of the way she was in school. Evasive, elusive, desirable. The desirability had disappeared, but the rest was there. Did he have any money troubles, relationship issues, the kind of thing that leads people to dislike each other?
"I don't know about his private life. He kept it, well, private. I really didn't know him that well."
Maya responded with an evasiveness that was becoming familiar and annoying. "So you can't think of any reason your brother is laid dead in the morgue in Denia Hospital?" Javea asked, pressing hard as he dared. Maya shook her head. She said, "No." But something inside Javea suggested she had more than she was willing to give. Chapter 21. Javea walked out of Maya's apartment building with a growing sense of frustration. He was used to it in his job. Nobody wanted to talk. He had developed thick skin to it. The frustration would bubble under for a few minutes while he processed it, and then it would be gone. Javea had no choice. He had to let go of it. The person in his life that best dealt with frustration was Angelica. He grabbed his phone, dialed her number, and waited for the response. Just a chat with her about something, about anything would help him move to the next step. And he had to get over Maya's reticence for the benefit of the case, and the benefit of Maya's brother. If he was murdered, then he deserved justice. She answered. Javi? It wasn't totally normal for him to call her. He often texted instead. A call meant something. She was sure of it. Angelica, how are you fixed this evening? This evening? She stalled. Yes, I'd like someone to talk to. I can't think of anyone I'd rather talk to than you. Can you get a babysitter? Fancy a bite to eat? Is that what you English call it? Typical Javi. Straight to the point. He didn't have much in the way of small talk. He jumped straight in. Angelica was taken back by the directness. She was used to it when they were investigating a murder together. But she didn't have experience of Javi being like this with his personal life. She didn't have much at all in the way of experience with Javi's personal life. They were friends, growing into very good friends, but whenever they met, it was her that suggested it. He was the one who was embarrassed, stuck to the spot, unable to commit. Now the tables had been turned. The silence drew the moisture from Javi's mouth. He decided to give her 5 seconds, counting in his head, before he would withdraw the offer. It was obviously causing an issue. The last thing he wanted with Angelica was an issue. She made him feel alive. Before he could, another call flashed up on his phone. The irregular background beep alerting him to the incoming call. Withdrawing the phone from his face to look at the display, he saw that it was Kiki calling him. He couldn't ignore a work call for a personal one. Sorry, Angelica, I've got a call on the other line. I'll have to get back to you. And he was gone. Angelica kicked herself. Literally. Rubbing the shin on her left leg where her right foot had landed. She wondered what had caused her momentary reluctance. Maybe it was instinctive, but she liked Javi. Liked him a lot. She decided at the point in time to ask Mariana if she would look after Tommy that evening, and she decided to say yes far more often. Chapter 22. What is happening here? Angelica asked Mariana, who agreed to look after Tommy in a heartbeat. She loved the kid, not seeing enough of her own grandchildren. He was the surrogate next door. Mariana had the best of both worlds. Access to an energetic, excitable child, and the ability to walk away when she'd had enough. I'm honestly not sure. He's a great guy, but I don't think he's out for a relationship. And how about you? I'm happy where I am in life, but having someone to share it all with makes things happier, doesn't it? Only if it's the right someone. Just any old someone can lead to more unhappiness. If you're unhappy where you are now, then why change anything? Mariana asked. She had a point. Rocking the boat led people falling over the side. If she fell over the side, Angelica was big enough and old enough to climb back on board. But what if that person who fell over the side was Tommy? He'd had enough turmoil in his short life already. He's a good man, and I'm comfortable around him. That counts for a lot, Angelica explained, trying to talk it out to herself rather than persuade Mariana. She knew her kindly neighbour would ask her all manner of difficult questions, but the one thing she wouldn't do was give her opinion. She was good at prompting Angelica to think it out for herself. The next few seconds were ones of silence, but not the uncomfortable kind. They were the silence of cogs working inside Angelica's brain, while Mariana gave her the space and quiet to let the cogs grind. Do I stop it before it goes too far? What does too far look like? Mariana prompted before going silent again. She was good at this, Angelica thought. Maybe it was Mariana who should be working with Javi to question killers. It was a great method of getting the other person to search deep inside for answers. Angelica had some answers herself, and they were answers about herself. She would do what made her happy, No plan, no ulterior motive. Just let the world move around her, look after Tommy, please herself, and see where that took her. She couldn't think of a better way to both live her life and guide her child. "Thank you, Mariana," Angelica spoke. "I didn't say anything. Well, not much, anyway. But, as always, you said all the right things. Why say 100 words when 5 will do?" Angelica asked, and she already knew she wouldn't get an answer. Mariana was far too wise for that. She knew the difference between a rhetorical question and one that needed an answer, even in a language that wasn't her mother tongue. Chapter 23. Javea looked up at the sky, expecting rain. It wasn't due, but something in the back of his mind suggested that a downpour was imminent. The microclimate in and around Javea was dictated by the fact it was surrounded by the mountain on one side and the Mediterranean on the other. The rain could come from either direction, off the sea or down the mountain. Much of the infrastructure in the region was lent towards managing the flow of water. The gullies alongside the roads led the water to the sea. The barriers near the port and arenals stopped the seawater getting onto the land. Between them, the water was successfully managed most of the time. On the occasions it wasn't, catastrophe hit. Camping sites were washed off the face of the earth. Underground car parks were completely flooded, the damp pervading for years after. He looked up as he listened. Kiki had something to tell him. "You need to get back here as quickly as possible." By this time, Javea had walked back to his car. He had driven 1/2 mile in the general direction of the police station without having a set plan that he was going straight back there. He had pulled up to call Angelica, and then this awkward call had been interrupted by a call from Kiki. The police database system was back up and running, and she felt the need to call him as soon as she had found out a certain piece of information. "We know Hugo Cruz. He has come up in our searches before. You said that you half remembered his name. Well, you can remember the whole thing now." Javea grunted something affirmative and restarted his engine. If it was that important, he had no time to waste. He heard the beep from the car behind as he cut them up, not looking in either mirror as he left the curb. He had bigger fish to fry. Chapter 24. No answer. Angelica and Mariana stood together in the hallway between their apartments. Angelica knew the reception was better there. Mariana knew that her neighbour would feel more confident if she wasn't stood outside someone else's home, and she felt invested in the conversation Angelica was trying to have. "I wonder if I've upset him." "And?" Mariana asked. She was old enough in the tooth to know that a little upset was easy to heal, that life was far too short for grudges, and that if Javea Jones was going to mess her neighbour around, then she was better off without him. "Good answer, well put," Angelica replied. She felt a lightness in life when she was around Mariana. The elderly neighbour didn't have much to say, but when she did, it was all worth listening to. Angelica resolved in her head to give Javea one more try. If he didn't answer, then she would give Delia a call and see if she was up for a girly night out. It was rare that Angelica was brave enough to ask Mariana to look after Tommy. Even though she knew the answer would pretty much always be positive, she didn't want to impose. Seeing as she had the freedom of a babysitter, Angelica would make the most of it. She dialed again. Javea didn't answer. Angelica didn't leave a voicemail. He would be able to see that she had tried to call him twice. Ball was now in his court. She was aware that him having another call might have been a real thing rather than just an excuse to get off the line and go out of an embarrassing conversation. He was a busy man, a detective, and there was a live investigation going on. Angelica sent Delia a text, asking what she was doing that evening, and left it at that. Hopefully, one of the two people she was trying to get to come out with her would reply. If it was both of them, then she would have a dilemma. Mariana left her to it, agreeing to take care of Tommy that evening, no matter who Angelica went out with, even if she ended up going on her own. Angelica had grown accustomed to spending time on her own. She would happily eat a meal at a table by herself, or go to a movie without a companion. She was prepared to do that for a night out, away from home, with a little freedom. Javi had asked first, and deep down, she would prefer to spend some time with him. There was no pressure when they were together. She enjoyed his company, and he clearly enjoyed hers. She could relax with Javi. As for Delia, relaxation was never on the agenda. Delia would pressure Angelica to stay out late, to have too much to drink, to spill the beans on her love life, to commit to coming out again in a few days' time. She loved her friend, but it wasn't always the most comfortable environment to be in. Angelica concluded that everyone had at least one friend just like Delia, and that was okay. She just hoped that Javi would call back first. And who knows, if she is on her own, she could go out and check the murder scene again. Anything for the thrill of the chase. Anything to feel a small part of the adulation her brother Augustine, the murder detective, got back at home. Chapter 25. "Tell me what you've got," Javi asked Kiki as soon as he walked into the room. She was used to his directness, and the fact that he'd bought her a takeaway coffee on the way had softened the fact he only saw her as a source of information. They worked incredibly well together, but Kiki felt like she was always in the background, only asked for an opinion as a last resort. But that was part of the role of an administrator in the Spanish police. She was there to support, not to lead. But work the role well, and she could rise to the same level as Javi in a few years, especially if he put in a good word for her. She swallowed her tiny piece of disappointment with her first gulp of coffee and spoke. "The system is back up and running, which allowed me to check the names involved in this. Hugo Cruz was the most interesting of these. He murdered another child when he was at school. He spent most of his youth in a children's prison and his early childhood in a Madrid jail. He killed a child in a fight in the school playground. I remember my parents speaking about him to my brother. Hugo Cruz is the boogeyman, the warning to all boys in Javea not to fight on the playground at school. I now remember the words my parents uttered to my brother. Do you want to end up in prison like Hugo Cruz?" "That's why I don't remember him. He wasn't there," Javi countered, recalling his brief chat with Hugo's sister Maya. No wonder she was evasive about her brother. She would hardly know him at all, especially from childhood. And there was the shame of having a killer in your family. Javi didn't know how his family would react to something like that. The boy who was killed was called Enrico Moro. They were both 10 at the time. Hugo's sister wasn't born when the killing took place. She had never known her brother as a kid, only finding out when Hugo returned to the area after his prison sentence had ended. It was quite a shock to her. Maya had learned to live with it, but kept Hugo at arm's length. She didn't know much about him. "I was only 14 when we moved to Javea permanently," Javi mused. The killing had already taken place and life had moved on. Maya didn't mention a brother at the time because I guess she didn't know she had one. It's strange how the world turns, isn't it? I've spoken to an old school friend today, and you've investigated the boogeyman. Between us, we've taken a trip down memory lane. But it's now time to look forward. What do all these links tell us, Kiki?" "Not sure yet, boss, but the answer is out there somewhere." Kiki looked over at Javi, who was already somewhere else. She had no idea where the place was. It could have been a desert island for all she knew. The only thing for certain is that he wasn't present in the room, only in body, not in spirit. Chapter 26. "Tommy is growing more every day. At least that's what it seems like to me. Have you ever known a 6-year-old child in 8 to 9 clothes? He's not wide, but he's tall. I guess he takes after his uncle Augustine," Angelica explained. She was on the phone to her brother. It happened every couple of weeks. They chewed the fat, caught up and made each other feel good about life and the world. Siblings had a way of making that happen for each other. Nightingale is at that age where she is into everything. I feel like the worst parent in the world. I use the word no around 100 times a day. Christine must use it 700. Is there any wonder that kids grow up with a negative attitude to everything? The pair of them laughed. Augustine always had a way of analysing the smallest detail in anything. Angelica had learned to let go of things like that long ago. Maybe it was parenting wearing her down. Maybe it was that she was the bad parent. Maybe it was neither. That's nothing. She will occupy your mind every minute of every day for some time to come now. This is the easy bit. Wait until she's at school. She's a teenager. She's an adult. You know that our parents had it easy with me. As for you, well, headache a day. You're kidding. I thought I was the good one. They laughed again. In truth, both of them had their moments as children. It was much easier to remember the good times for you as the naughty ones for someone else. That was human nature. So, how are things with you and Javi? Augustine probed. He had met Javi Jones on a visit to Javea and liked the guy. He just didn't realise how much his sister liked the guy too. Augustine was the protective older brother who wouldn't let pre-teen boyfriends into the house when they knocked for his little sister. At first, Augustine asked his sister about Javi to tease her, but when she bit, he asked because he wanted his sister to be protected. I'm glad you asked. You are? Yeah, there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you. Go ahead. Gus, how do you look back into a murder without the resources you guys in the police have? Newspapers mainly. We use reports sometimes, but they offer more than a simple police report. Why? Oh, nothing. Just curious about what it is Javi does. He does the same as I do. You know that. So what is this really about? Really? You wouldn't lie to your big brother, would you? I saw a killing the other day. Are you okay? Yeah, absolutely fine. It's been said that the death was an accident. I just don't buy it. There's something fishy going on, Gus. I want to get to the bottom of it. Angelica, you have a child. So do you. That doesn't stop you doing all those dangerous things. I want some of the action. Well, I'm not helping you get injured or worse. Gus, you're no help. Why do you and Javi have to get all the fun? Ange, I care about you. Javi Jones cares about you, then he'll keep you out of this. He respects my decisions. I'm old enough to decide what I can and can't do. It's not up to you, Gus. I've had enough of this conversation. I'm out. And she put the phone down. Angelica didn't like hanging up on anyone, let alone a family member, but she had to break the frustration she was feeling. Chapter 27. Kiki, let's look through the files for the Enrico Moro murder. I know it was some time ago, but we still have information there, won't we? Kiki nodded. She was already out of her seat. She had been part of the operation to transfer the old paper files to computer, scanning each document and assigning it to a particular file number. She already knew from her involvement in the project that they hadn't got as far as the late 1970s, when the Enrico Moro murder must have happened. And she knew just where to look. 5 minutes later, she was back in the office with a file tucked under her arm. Kiki was a short woman. Not short for Spanish standards, but shorter than most of the rest of the world. She wore similar outfits to Javi, following him in fashion as well as work style and ethics. Her long brown hair was tied up with several hairbands. These were wound in a way that made the entire head of hair look like it was wrapped to the head, not moving an inch all day. It sure kept the whole lot in place. Javi had never seen her with her hair down. He had no idea how long it was, only guessing that it was at least halfway down her back. Let's take a look, shall we? Kiki indicated as she put the file down on the desk in front of them. It was around 20 pages thick. They took the first two, one each, and consumed the contents, only stopping every 30 seconds or so to show the other one a line on the page that seemed mildly significant. Nothing to stop their world, but information that helped to build a picture. This process followed, them reading a page at roughly the same time before moving on to the next. The interviews with Hugo Cruz were as simplistic as you'd expect from a 10-year-old child. He'd committed an adult crime, but he had no idea what that meant in the adult world. He was just a child in the playground fighting for his place in the school world they both occupied. Survival of the strongest was the rule of the playground. It was only when they reached the statements from Enrico Moro's family that they stopped and read together. It was obvious from the outset that they were both angry with Hugo. They didn't want justice. The statements read as though they wanted revenge. From his father, "This boy is evil. He doesn't deserve to continue his life when he has taken the life of our son. We will toil, we will prevail. Justice will be served if we have to use our last breath to make it happen." From his brother, "I don't want to admit that I live in a world that carries evil such as this, but I have no choice. I have to admit it. Evil lives inside Hugo Cruz, and he has let that evil come out to kill my brother. I cannot rest until I know he has been given the ultimate injustice." Scary stuff, Javi muttered to himself, Kiki, and nobody in particular at the same time. She nodded. There was nothing else to add. Chapter 28. Half an hour later, Kiki came back into Javi's office with a piece of paper, handwritten notes scrawled on it. Her handwriting, her news, hers to break to Javi. "Nothing." "Nothing?" he demanded. "Both of the parents and the brother Enrico cannot be found. The mother died around 10 years ago. There is plenty of coverage of her in the newspaper when she died. She had given a great deal of time to charity that campaigned against violence. I guess her experience led her to that." "And the father? The younger brother?" "Like I say, nothing." "Like I say, what do you mean nothing?" "There are no records of either. The father was pictured at the funeral. This got a lot of press coverage alongside the mother of the murdered boy. The campaigner who devoted her life to changing the world in her child's name. Then he disappears. He isn't recorded as living anywhere, working anywhere, dying anywhere. The same with the younger brother. The pair of them disappeared off the face of the earth around the time of the funeral. The boy before the funeral, the man after. We have no record at all of where these two ended up in life or death." Javi sucked in air as though his life depended on getting as much oxygen into his lungs at that precise moment. Kiki felt like the room suddenly became a less enjoyable place to be in. It was. Javi's mood changed instantly. He hated a dead end, but he felt like he was being faced by them at every turn. "What can we tell from this information?" he asked Kiki. She hesitated. It wasn't as though she could come up with an answer. It was unanswerable as far as she was concerned. What could you conclude from someone disappearing off the face of the earth? More or less than you could from two related people disappearing? She didn't know. That they wanted to be lost? Possibly. Or someone else wanted them to be lost? Another possibility. So, we ask, why would they want to become lost? What would these two men have to gain? Money? Shall I look at the will? Great start, Javi responded, liking the way this conversation was panning out. It gave them the ability to start something different and come up with actions. No more dead ends. Maybe. And if someone wanted them to disappear, what would be the motive there? Money again? Could be. What else? It could be linked to the murder of their family member. Could be. So where can we go with that? Javi asked, his brain reaching for something that seemed just outside of his sphere of influence. He was sure he would get there, but not sure how. How about the rest of Hugo's family? Haven't we reached a dead end with that one already? Javea asked. Kiki nodded. She had looked up the family, and so far all she had come up with was Maya, and Javea had already drawn a blank there. I think I might need to speak to Maya again at some stage, but there's no reason to at the moment, Javea spoke. All the while, Kiki's gaze was concentrated on one image, a newspaper cutting from the time of the murder that had been left in the file. Kiki looked longer and harder at the image. The face that stared back at her was Hugo's younger brother. Chapter 29. Angelica? Javea asked. He hadn't got used to just starting conversations. Back when phones were attached by a cable to the wall in the home, you had to ask who it was at the other end just to make sure you had the right person. Now phones sat in the pocket of the person you had dialed directly. This question seemed redundant. Javea still asked. Javea. The single-word answer wasn't like her. He wondered if he had upset her. He had cut her off during their last conversation. But she knew he was a detective, knew he could be called away at any moment in time. She had a brother who was in exactly the same profession back at home in the northeast of England. It couldn't be that, could it? Surely not. But before he had ended the call abruptly, she had hesitated when he had asked her to dinner. This might be the problem. Before he had the chance to think of something else to say in an attempt to break the discomfort, he heard Tommy laughing in the background. She was distracted by her child, not playing the silent game with him. Is that Tommy? He asked, another question he already knew the answer to. Yes, we're down by the pool. Tommy's splashing around, doing what mams do best, watching. Sounds like fun. Sorry about earlier, I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that. Javea, it's fine. Javea, it's fine. My mind was elsewhere. You just caught me with my guard up for a second. I slipped back into the old Angelica, the one I came to Spain to get away from. Well, the new Angelica is here now. If you've not been inundated with other offers, I'd like to go out for something to eat with you tonight. The pair of them laughed. They were both friendly people, but guarded enough that they didn't let many people into their inner sanctum. Javea wouldn't have asked anyone else. Angelica had arranged a babysitter and then asked Delia, still no reply, so they were free to grab something. Half an hour later, Angelica was in the bathroom. Tommy was getting a bath. He didn't see the point of getting into a bath for a wash when he had just spent an hour in the water of the pool. Angelica wanted him washed and ready for bed when she left, when Mariana made the 5-yard trip from her next-door apartment. Angelica was washing her face. It was a twice-daily routine, usually when she got ready in the morning and again last thing at night. But if she was going out, then she would bring the second occasion forward. Once her face felt cleansed, she applied makeup. Not so much that she would look like it was a date, but enough that it didn't appear that she wasn't taking care of herself. Angelica was happy that she had been blessed with a son. Pressures on women on how they looked and dressed was strong. She felt it wasn't quite as powerful for the male of the species. Tommy was out and getting dried by now. She would do a final check, the armpits, the backs of the knees and between the toes, all the places he missed regularly. Tommy was pretty good at getting himself ready. He had learned to be. There were only so many hours in the day for a single mother to do all the things needed to keep a home clean and tidy, plus look after a child. Javea shaved with his electric shaver. He had moved over from a wet shave a few years earlier when the price of razors coupled with the fact you could only get 1 or 2 days' decent shave out of them meant he was spending far too much on items that ended up in the bin several times per week. There was only so much cash to go around. Although he lived on his own, had simple tastes and never started a family, his money went in several different places. Firstly, he still sent money to his parents every month. It was more of a tradition in Spain than it was in Wales, but he was doing well enough to spare £100 a month from his pay packet. Then there were the gambling debts that he had run up over the years. His gambling went out of control around a decade earlier, nearly bankrupting him. He just about managed to keep everything together. He feared for his career at the time, thinking that a man who couldn't manage his own finances wouldn't be allowed to manage the finances of the murder investigation team for the local police. That was more than half of his income, still paying off debts when he chased loans nearly 20 years ago. Javea felt that he was obliged to pay it back. The first chunks were to the loan sharks that had given him money when nobody else would. There were 2 reasons for this. Firstly, the interest rates were the highest. Secondly, these were the kind of guys that wouldn't flinch giving a beating to someone who worked for the police if they were late on their payments. His kneecaps were in the place he wanted them to remain. After shaving, he moisturised. When he first did so, back in his teens, his father mocked him, laughing incessantly. But he persisted. His skin and the heat of the Spanish sunshine needed some moisture putting back in. Angelica put on a few outfits, checking each one in the mirror for how it made her look before taking them off and putting them either in the maybe pile or back in the wardrobe. She only had 10 to 15 outfits in total. She knew she had more than enough time to try them all on twice and decide before she was due to meet Javea at the end of her street, near to the sea in an hour. She chose an outfit that ticked all the boxes as far as she was concerned. It was a dress, red, high top, slit in the leg but respectable. Delia had called her mumsy when she wore it on a girls' night out. That felt like the perfect description for a dress to go out for dinner with Javea. She wasn't sure about their future direction. No need in giving out the wrong signals. They would have a chat, have a laugh, and have some great food. Angelica hadn't experienced anything other than great food when she went out in Javea. The Spanish wouldn't put up with anything less. The tourists would simply go somewhere else. A poor meal or menu would be the end of a place in a few weeks. There was that much choice that you just had to offer people great food and great service. Javea set off. He had much further to walk to get to the end of Angelica's street. He was a good 20 minutes away if he walked at full speed, but he didn't want to arrive soaked in sweat. The temperature was still in its 20s, warm enough to go out in short sleeves. He had chosen a charcoal grey pair of Calvin Klein trousers that he bought 15 years earlier. His only regret with them was that he hadn't bought 10 pairs of them. They would have kept him going in trousers for the rest of his life. He paired this with a blue shirt with a white stripe along the left side from top to bottom. He had tried orange and pink shirts before deciding they were a little too much for the occasion. He loved those shirts, but didn't want to give off the impression that he was overdressing. He'd asked her out for a chat and a bite to eat. He felt the need to dress for that occasion. Angelica said her goodbyes to Tommy. He had already switched off to his mother and tuned into Mariana. The elderly neighbour had a wonderful energy about her. Tommy loved being in her company, but he had no idea why. Angelica loved being in her company. She had every idea why. Mariana was calm, emotionally intelligent and interesting. But most of all, she made people around her feel like they were better. Better than they were without her. Nothing egotistical about it. She was just someone who brought out the best in others. Angelica started walking. She let the slight breeze run through her hair and thanked herself that she had tossed a cardigan in her handbag. She might need it on the walk home. At the end of the street, she could see Javea with a smile all over his face. Approaching, Angelica shouted over the street, "You don't smile often enough." "Feels good to let your hair down every now and again. You look lovely, by the way." Javi blushed more than Angelica at this comment. He was trying to be friendly. You would if you were wearing this, Angelica responded, breaking the ice and restoring the natural colour to Javi's face. They walked along the front towards the Arenal. Javi said he had the perfect place for them. Angelica trusted his judgment. The warmth of the night brought a contentment to both.